The harrowing tale of Patriots player Calvin Anderson's near-fatal bout with malaria. That's up on bostonglobe.com right now, written by Christopher Price of The Globe. And this is a must-read for anybody, not just football fans, not just Patriots fans, because Calvin Anderson, this was a guy signed as a free agent last offseason, supposed to be a starting right tackle, and days before training camp came down with malaria and was literally in a battle for his life. And Chris Price of The Globe is joining us now on Foxboro Rush with me and Travis Thomas. Chris, this is a great read from start to finish because you hit on how Calvin Anderson met his savior in his wife, Shereé, and how he found his way back to the football field. But I want to start with, how did Calvin Anderson, get malaria, and how did he discover he had it to know he had to get to a hospital here in the States?
First of all, it's a pleasure being on with you guys. I really like it. It's just, I love talking about this story. I could talk about this story all day. He and his wife do a lot of philanthropic work back in Nigeria. His wife is half Nigerian. And so it's not only an opportunity to go back and help out some people who need some helping out, but she can see relatives. And it's just a nice way to for them to give back. And so last year, in late June, early July, they went to Nigeria with a specific goal of doing some philanthropic work. And he gets bitten by a mosquito. And they don't really think much of it until they're back in the United States. The first night they're back in the United States, he wakes up with a fever of 104.5, and he is in football mode. Now, you guys know that mid to late July, there is a singular focus with a lot of these guys. It's about training camp. It's about winning a job. It's about putting out good reps. It's about, not to put too fine a point on it, but it's about doing your job. And he really initially dismissed it and said, look, it's a cold, it's a flu, I'm going to be okay, I'm going to fight through this. His wife, Shereé, was very insistent, saying, look, we got to get to the hospital. We got to get this taken care of. 104.5 fever is not natural. They get him to the hospital. She puts him in a car. They go to Newton Wellesley Hospital, and through some blood tests, some blood work, meeting with doctors, they find out that he has malaria. And it gets to a point where they are told he has a 50-50 chance to live or die. And so that really started an absolutely, as I said in the story, it's a harrowing journey for him, his wife, and, the folks connected with him, because this is no joke. Malaria, for the most part, has been eradicated in the United States. But at the same time, this is something that's very, very serious. And all of a sudden, they kind of flip into crisis mode.
I want to go deeper into that subject of his wife, Shereé, because there's a part in this story where you're saying basically he flipped out in the hospital and she was there as a calming voice. So not only did she take this thing seriously from the onset to get him to said hospital, but then as you're going through the trials and tribulations of what he went through, she was right there with him and kept him calm at times. Can you talk about that part of the story and really just her role in general in all of this of keeping this man alive, quite frankly?
You guys have spent enough time around elite athletes to know that sometimes they need to be saved from themselves.
Yes.
And the only people who can save them from themselves a lot of times are their significant others. And honestly, Calvin was very, very lucky in this case to have someone like Shereé looking out for his best interest, because again, the focus at that time of year is football. It's all football all the time. You're getting ready to dive in for 6 months. And this is a guy who also felt a tremendous sense of obligation, not only to the Patriots, but to Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick is a guy who went out. He was the first outside free agent that this team signed in the offseason. This guy was a journeyman over the course of the first few years of his career. Bill Belichick is the first guy to give him a multi-million-dollar contract. And so he feels a real obligation to Bill. He says, look, I can't focus on anything else right now. I got to focus on football. What she does is really snap him back to reality and help him understand that, look, we're entering a life or death situation here. You need to take care of yourself. You need to be able to be mindful of what this is. You need to get a little more information. He ended up going to his dad, who's a doctor as well, FaceTiming with his dad to get some real information. But this kind of leads to the next part of it. And I know we're going to kind of get into this, Trav, the idea that there was a mental health aspect to this whole thing here. Because, we mentioned the freak out thing when he's sitting in the hospital bed, like ripping at his IVs and stuff. That led to a whole series of events for him where he got to a very dark place. He really got to a dark place where there was an understanding, like, look, this is what really defined him as an athlete. And if he's bedridden, how can he kind of work through this? How can he work to kind of get better and get back in the field? The other thing too, and this is a big part of it, it's not a traditional rehab for him. It's not like he hurt his knee, he hurt his elbow, he got a concussion, whatever the case may be, that he could kind of work through, be given a timetable and say, okay, look, I'll be back on the field in 4 to 6 weeks. This is very, very different. This is very, very unique.
Yeah, I love how you hit on the article. You said the story of how him and his wife met, and she literally said to you, quote, "He's my person." So that showed to me the significance they have for one another, but the care she has for him and how well she took care of him. And you hit on it. It's mental. It was a physical recovery for Calvin Anderson. I mean, how is he doing now? Because, Chris, I remember right before week 1, Philadelphia Eagles in Gillette Stadium, I'm on the field, I'm watching the offensive linemen warm up, and I'm looking at Calvin Anderson, who's a starting right tackle, and I go, I knew he had something because it was an illness he was dealing with. And I look at his legs. I'm like, he looks like he's thin for a lineman. So in that context, right? And
Yeah,
I want to ask like a human now. Like, I understand what he went through, and malaria is so serious. So I'm not digging the guy to not have the biggest legs coming out of that. I understand. But where is he now physically, mentally? Because it was the 4 a.m. battles with himself, looking himself in the mirror. And physically, this is a guy that's locked in, that wants to get back to being someone that can help out the Patriots up front.
He is back to, this is what he told me, he is back to his old playing weight, 6'5", 305. This is what he was when he first came into the league with the Jets, and he was initially signed with the Patriots, went to the Jets, went to Denver, had probably the best stretch of his career over a couple of years at 6'5" and 305. And this is, he's a big, strong, sturdy guy, and he looks almost, in my experience, he looks like the same guy he was a couple of years ago, or at least last summer when he first came into Foxboro. So he is back to where he wants to be physically, mentally. We talked before we started here. I think it's going to be really interesting because the Patriots went out, they drafted an offensive tackle, they got one guy in free agency. It's going to be fascinating to see how it all kind of plays out for him, at least from a practical perspective. I think that he's in the mix when you talk about a potential left tackle, maybe when you talk about a swing tackle here. But right now, as we sit here in mid-May, he is back to where he needs to be physically to be able to compete for a starting job in the NFL.
And how is he mentally doing as well? Because I can imagine the hit this is. You said the timeline. If you tear an ACL, if you injure your shoulder, there's a 2, 3, maybe 12-month time period to recover. But this is someone that started the first 2 weeks, was on the active roster, was put on the IR because he had a heart contusion, which is a bruise to the heart. So how is he mentally now that all this time, I can imagine, this isn't a story you do overnight or over the course of a week, but spending this much time with Calvin Anderson and his wife, talking to them, how are they both doing now mentally?
I think they're both okay. I do. I think that they're both I spent more time with Calvin than I did with Shereé, so I can really only speak to him in this aspect that he's a very spiritual guy. He was a very spiritual guy before all of this, very thoughtful, very introspective, very philosophical. And I think he's in a good place mentally, at least at the start of this season, because a lot of it really, right now for him, it's about competition. And I think that is the thread that he can kind of pull on and say, look, I need to be sharp. I need to be back. I am where I need to be physically. And so the mental aspect is going to kind of follow. The other thing, too, we talk about the mental aspect of it all, and I think it's really important to bring up here. The idea of the offensive lineman's code is really important when you talk about the mental struggles that he went through. It's not only feeling like you let down Bill Belichick or you let down the rest of the team, but it's very much of an offensive lineman thing, that there's a feeling that I'm going to be there for the guy to the left of me, to the right of me. We are a group, we are a unit. It's tough to quantify successful offensive line play because you don't necessarily need the 5 best offensive linemen in the planet. You need the 5 guys who work the best together. Mm-hmm. And I think the work that he did with the guys on that offensive line over the course of the spring, he felt like he was letting them down. I think now he feels like he's in a much better place mentally than he was at the end of the season.